Today we're going to talk about something that's quietly reshaping our world, the relationship between the European Union and China. For, decades, they were seen as these essential partners. But now, a lot of people think they're on a direct collision course. Let's get into why.
All right, so check this out. Some of the sharpest minds in geopolitics, folks over at Lazard, have basically circled 2026 on the calendar. They're saying that's the year when all the chaos and shifts we've been seeing will finally settle, and we'll see what the new global power map actually looks like. It's a pretty bold claim, and it really sets the stage for everything we're about to discuss.
So that brings us to the big question, right? What does this mean for the EU and China? Is this partnership, which was built on decades and decades of trade, really headed for a crash? All the signs are pointing to a really fundamental shift that's happening as we speak. To really get where we're going, you have to understand just how much things have changed. For years, it was a pretty simple deal. The EU looked to China as its factory, and China looked to Europe for high-end tech and investment. But yeah, that era of easy cooperation, it's over.
The new buzzword you hear coming out of Brussels all the time is de-risking. Now, it is absolutely crucial to get this right. De-risking is not the same as decoupling. The idea isn't to cut China off completely. It's about pulling back and making sure you're not dangerously dependent on any one country for the stuff that really matters.
So why this big strategic pivot all of a sudden? Well, think about the last few years. We had the absolute chaos in supply chains during the pandemic, and then the energy crisis that exploded with the war in Ukraine. Those were huge wake-up calls for Europe. They learned, the hard way, that being too dependent on someone else isn't just an economic headache, it's a massive security risk. And that realization leads us directly to the real battlefield of this new rivalry. It's a global race for the critical resources that are going to power, everything in the 21st century. We're talking about the absolute building blocks of our future. Lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements. These aren't just some abstract things on the periodic table anymore. They are the lifeblood of everything from the battery in your electric car to the wind turbines and the super advanced chips needed for AI. In this chart, this really shows you the scale of the problem for Europe. Let's just take cobalt, which you need for batteries. China doesn't actually mine most of it, but it controls almost 80% of the processing. That's the refining part. And that control over processing gives them a chokehold on the entire supply chain. So here's the bottom line. Europe has these incredibly ambitious goals for a green future, right? But the very supply chains they need to build that future are dominated by China. It's this massive contradiction between Europe's desire for independence and the cold, hard reality of its dependence. Now, this fight over physical stuff, minerals and resources, has a mirror image in the digital world. The next big battlefront is all about who gets to write the rules for technology and for global trade itself. And to understand this, you gotta know this cool new concept, the electrostate. Just think of it like the new version of a petrostate, but instead of power coming from oil, it comes from dominating electricity-related tech. And right now, China, with its lead in solar panels, batteries, and EVs, is pretty much the textbook example. So what's Europe's countermove? Well, they're scrambling for something they call tech sovereignty. It's basically this huge effort to wrestle back control over their digital destiny. Protecting their data, getting their own semiconductor supply chains going, and putting tech like AI and 5G under a much, much stronger microscope. And look, this isn't some far-off theoretical problem. This is happening right now. The trade friction is already boiling over. You've probably seen the headlines about the EU investigating China's subsidies for its electric car companies. That could easily lead to new tariffs, and you can bet Beijing has already warned that it's going to hit back. But who actually pays the price when a trade war kicks off? Well, it's kind of like a ripple effect. At first, the companies importing the goods eat the cost. But that doesn't last. The costs get passed down the line. And at the end of the day, study after study shows it's us, the consumers, who end up paying more for things. Of course, you can't talk about the EU and China without bringing in the other superpower in the room whose shadow hangs over every single one of these decisions, the United States. You see, Washington is putting some serious pressure on its European allies to get tougher on China, especially when it comes to slowing down its tech ambitions. And that puts Europe in a really, really difficult spot. It boils down to this fundamental choice. Does Europe go for economic pragmatism and try to keep those profitable trade relationships with China alive? Or does it choose geopolitical alignment with America, its most important security partner? Trying to do both at the same time is becoming almost impossible.
So you've got this resource race, the tech wars, the trade spats, and the pressure from the US. And all of these huge forces are now converging on one single critical point in time, the year 2026. So why 2026? What's the big deal? Well, it's shaping up to be a perfect storm. The EU's green agenda is going to hit a point of maximum demand for all those minerals that China controls. At the same time, Europe's strict new AI rules are going to kick in right in the middle of a global tech race. Plus, the US-China rivalry is only expected to heat up, squeezing Europe even more. It's a lot.
What you end up with is this incredibly fragile situation. Everything's on a knife's edge. And in an environment like this, something that seems small, one new tariff, a ban on one piece of tech, could be the first domino that triggers a massive tit-for-tat retaliation and fractures the whole relationship for good.
So if you take one thing away from this, it should be this. The old labels are gone. The European Union and China are not just partners anymore. They are competitors. And they're locked in a very high-stakes game for the resources, the technology, and the global influence that will define our century.
And that leaves us with the final, unavoidable question as we look toward that critical year. Is this collision course going to end with some kind of new, difficult compromise? Or is it going to spiral into open economic conflict? The answer, whatever it is going to shape all of our futures.